Benji Eckerle,
Cayla Eckenroth,
Brenden Draper,
Olivia Pascaris, Hannah Graff,
and we are 2030 News Network.
And today we are covering the West Memphis 3 case.
Summer fades into the blue, brand new colors come into view. Seasons change, I have to, just like the leaves of autumn. Different hopes and different dreams, different shades of feelings. Yellow, orange, red, and green, just like the leaves of autumn.
Defense opening and closing statements. All three attorneys were trying to convince everyone that these three teenagers were innocent and that the police messed up or planted evidence. There was a public outcry. People were angry and wanted justice. To please the public, the police found these three boys and made it seem as if they were murderers. There was a lot of evidence that showed that these boys were innocent, such as Damien Eccles' tunnel vision, police ineptitude, no proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and the most important one, Jesse Miss Kelly's story that he told the police. It was factually incorrect in many important ways, such as the time when the crime happened, what happened to the victims, and the objects used on the victims.
Summer fades into the blue, brand new colors come into view. Seasons change, I have to, just like the leaves of autumn. Different hopes and different dreams, different shades of feelings. Yellow, orange, red, and green, just like the leaves of autumn.
Jesse Miss Kelly was convicted
I don't know what's waiting for me, where I'll go or who I'll be. It's all part of the mystery, starting to unfold. All the trees are different hues, brace for what they're heading into.
Prosecution evidence. The prosecution started off by asking the parents of Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore how they last saw their children. Then they described how the boys were found at the crime scene. Three big parts of the prosecution evidence were Jesse Miss Kelly's confession, Damien Eccles, and Vicky Hutchison's confession. Vicky Hutchison's story was that her and Jesse were driven by Damien Eccles to a S-spot, which is a gathering of witches in a field outside of town, where she encountered 10 young people with their faces and arms painted black. They were engaging in sexual activity, and while doing so, they were calling each other Spider, Lucifer, or Snake. Offended by the naked activity, Hutchison, according to her story, asked Damien to drive her back home, which he did, leaving Jesse there. In late May, Vicky Hutchison and her 8-year-old son, Aaron, met with detectives. While Vicky shared her story about the S-spot, Aaron told the authorities that he and the three murdered boys often visited Robin Hood Woods together, and that on one visit to the woods they saw 5 men sitting in a circle chanting and doing what men and ladies do. Damien Eccles was a 17-year-old dropout with a history of psychiatric problems, including major depression. He wrote dark poems and read dark stories. He dressed in mostly black. He had long hair, had a tattoo on his upper arm and his fingertips, and was a self-described Wiccan. Eventually, the inconsistencies that troubled officers are ironed out, and Jesse's story began to match up with the known facts of the case. Some 5 hours after picking Jesse up, the police taped Jesse's confession. In the taped confession, Jesse states that while in Robin Hood Woods with Damien Eccles and Jesse Baldwin, he watched Eccles hit Chris Byers in the head with his fist and bruised him up real bad. And then Jason turned around and hit Stevie Branch. Then the other one took off. Michael Moore took off running. So I chased him and grabbed him and held him until they got there, and then I left. Jesse stated that when he returned to the scenes a minute later, all 3 boys had their clothes off and were all tied up. Then they tied them up, tied their hands up, they started screwing them and stuff, cutting them and stuff, and I saw it, and turned around, and I looked. And then I took off running. I went home. Then they called me and asked me how come I didn't stay. I told them I just couldn't.
I see.
Defense evidence. When asked about family and interests, Damien Eccles said that he enjoyed skateboarding, movies, talking on the phone, and reading. When he was asked about his Wicca religion, he said that it was basically a close involvement with nature. Damien insisted that he was not a Satanist and he did not believe in human sacrifice. When asked about how he felt about being convicted or being tried for these murders, he said that he was sometimes angry, sometimes sad, and sometimes scared. Damien's lawyer argued that having weird things in your room does not make you guilty. Quality of police investigation. The defense argued that they did not do a very good job of investigating the crime scene. Gary Gitchell, who was a witness for the defense, admitted that they had not bothered to tape any of the several interviews with Damien Eccles, although they had the equipment to do so. He also admitted that they had lost blood samples evidence from the Bojangles restaurant from the night of the murders. John Byers, who was the stepfather of Christopher Byers, gave a knife to the crew making a documentary about the case. He was called to testify about it, and he said that the blood on the knife was his, despite the fact that he had told the authorities an amazing amount of times that he had no idea how human blood could have gotten onto the knife. In conclusion, there was no physical evidence that the boys were connected to the murders. Jesse Miskelly was mentally retarded and his confessions were incorrect. Jesse Miskelly said, "I kept telling Inspector Gitchell and Detective Ridge I didn't know who did it. I just knew of it and what my friend had told me. But they kept hollering at me. They kept saying that they knew I had something to do with it because other people had told them. After I told them what the 3 boys were wearing, Gary Gitchell told me, was any of them tied up? That's when I went along with him. I repeated what he told me. I said, yes, they were tied up. He asked what were they tied up with. I told him rope. He got mad. He told me, gosh dang it, Jesse, don't mess with me. He said no. They was tied up with shoestrings. I had to go through the whole story again until I got it right. They hollered at me until I got it right. So whatever he was telling me, I started telling him back. But I figured something was wrong, because if I killed them, I'd know how I would done it."
Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly were all guilty of capital murder of Steve Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore.